Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Cloud Architects podcast. My name is Nicholas Blank, and I'm here with my co-host, Christopher Goosen.
Hello.
Today, we have a guest which we featured on the show before, Michael Van Horenbeeck.
Hi, everyone.
Welcome to the show, and thank you so much for appearing again. We are excited that there's something that you are launching fairly soon, and it's a book. So without wanting to spoil too much, why don't you tell us what your book is about and why you've decided to write it?
Sure. So the book is called Microsoft 365 Security for IT Professionals, and some of you might recognize that the title kind of resembles the Office 365 for IT Professionals book, which is done on purpose. A couple of years back, Tony, Paul Cunningham, and I, we started an adventure, I should say, of writing a book which is kept up to date on a monthly basis, the Office 365 for IT Professionals book. The reason why we started that journey a couple of years back is because the cloud is moving at lightning speed, updating almost on a daily basis. So trying to create a book which isn't outdated from the day that you publish it was an interesting challenge. And I believe I wrote for the book about 3-4 years. After which, life got in the way, so I kind of dropped off as an author, and an entire team took over from Paul and me, and there's a whole author team now. But still, I like to write. In the meantime, I also switched over to the security side of things, where over the past couple of years, all I've done is security. And I noticed there wasn't really a security book in the same space or following the same model, kind of keeping up to date on a monthly basis. And, with the focus from Microsoft on everything, security and compliance, there is a ton of stuff that's changing, really like a lot of that. So I figured, let's bring on that challenge. Let's try and write a book and keep it up to date at the same pace. But rather than focusing on the productivity side of things, just focus on the M365 and, by extension, a little bit of Azure security as well. And that's how we got to the book, which, by the way, we should be releasing, very shortly.
That's super exciting. I think, and for a number of reasons, right? I think, one, I think that most people, or at least a large part of the audience, will understand or know of the Office 365 for IT Pros venture and the work that you and Tony and everyone have done on that, because it really is the standard as far as a book of knowledge around Office 365 goes, right? And it's something that I've given to customers in the past when I've worked with customers and they've said, hey, where do I go for knowledge? Where do I go to learn more about Office 365? What training courses can I go on? I've given them a copy of the book and gone, here you go. Actually hijacked Tony once at Ignite and made him sign a whole bunch of USB keys for me. He wasn't pleased. So I think that same kind of methodology is fantastic, because I think one of the things I've found over the last little while, since I've started doing a lot more security focused work as well, is sometimes the documentation is not quite where the product is, and so. All I can say is, hats off and congratulations, but it seems like a mammoth challenge to me to be kind of taking that on, keeping that publishing kind of cycle going on something that is that bleeding edge.
Yeah. So, you have no idea how much effort that goes into the book. We started writing last year. And, the initial effort of writing a chapter is massive, right? But as you're writing the chapter, they keep changing stuff. And you're like finding yourself writing bits and pieces and then rewriting it and then writing new bits and pieces and rewriting older stuff that you've written a couple of weeks back. So to get to the point where we're, ready to release has been a massive undertaking. But the real challenge starts now, updating the book on a monthly basis. And if there's one thing that I've learned is, don't underestimate it. I did in the past a little bit where, sometimes I, didn't account for the time to write the chapters, right? Which meant that I had to, do it last minute, which added a lot of burden. So I learned a lot from the earlier process. My respect for Tony for, keeping the book up to date, for keeping everyone in line, and for doing the copy editing has just grown tremendously. Because now I'm taking on that role and I'm like, oh God, what did I even start with, right? But at the same time, we're also, trying to get to the point where we want to be that book of knowledge, right? Where we want to centralize everything, give that practical guidance. But it's a journey, right? Even version 1 that we're releasing, we know there's stuff that we should get in there over time. Like, I'll give you a practical example. Office ATP, right? Due to some, author challenges, people dropping off halfway because they figured out, hey, this is too much of a word for us. We had to cut that chapter on version 1. So we're going to add that word as part of the release, in a couple of months' time. But that's a massive chapter, right? Like what our Defender ATP chapter, even without practical deployment guide information, is 120 pages. On that one, I'm not going to call it a little thing. It's quickly becoming this huge, massive stuff. And I think we'll learn as we go. But it is interesting to see at the very least.
Yeah, and I think the thing is, and we've said it on the show before, and it may even have been on the last episode where we call Microsoft the security vendor, right? Because at the end of the day, that's kind of where they are right now. And a lot of folks, and I'm seeing this firsthand with my recent role change, people don't take Microsoft seriously in the security space yet, or at least a lot of folks don't. But when you're able to look at something like this and go, well, this is how it all ties together, and this small thing that's just a tiny little endpoint thing is 100 and something pages worth of documentation. It's really starting to say something, and I think it's going to be a very easy way to quantify the value that the platform brings. Right, when you tie all these services together.
Yeah, I mean, and there's another interesting tidbit, right, which you just you mentioned. Microsoft's a security vendor. I'm entirely with you, right? There's things they don't do, right? They don't build firewall. They do build Azure firewalls, but don't build physical firewalls and stuff. But they have a whole plethora of options and solutions that somehow tie in together. They have a vast ecosystem, and it's uncovering that ecosystem, which is the interesting part and also the hard part. But at the same time, putting everything together as an author team, we're already facing the, where do we put this? In which chapter would this belong? Or like this feature, well, it belongs to product X, but it really belongs more to this, paradigm. So where do we put it into the book? So what I expect that will happen is over the course of the next couple of months, when, feedback trickles in, when Microsoft, releases new stuff, and God knows what they've got planned for Ignite this year, we'll be modifying and updating the book. And that's the beauty of updating monthly, right? If something doesn't belong in one chapter, well, we can take it out next month and put it somewhere else where it belongs better or where it feels more natural. But we see that today. Like, honestly, we've had discussions about, Windows information protection. Well, do we create a chapter on Windows 10 security? And if so, well, what about Defender ATP or attack surface reduction or exploit protection? Do we keep it in Defender ATP or do we put it in a Windows 10 protect? It's kind of like, ongoing discussions the entire time.
Yeah, and I think this probably is a really good insight into how meetings within the Microsoft marketing department go, right? Because they're constantly like they're changing the product names, but also the product name doesn't always align 100% with the rest of that platform. So I could definitely see how that would be a slight challenge.
Well, and it's not just that. The book is Microsoft 365 Security for IT Professionals. So obviously everyone looks at the M365 side of things, but what we've already committed to and we've started writing is an Azure Sentinel chapter. Now, Azure Sentinel, it is and it isn't M365 because it's Azure workload, but yet we put it there in the book. So you can see the bleed between the two worlds, productivity and Azure, which is typically infrastructure, kind of converging and becoming one. So maybe we should rename the book from the get-go to Microsoft Security for IT Professionals. I don't know.
No, that makes sense. I mean, I think where you're at now, I think it's definitely going to resonate with the way that it's named, and I think immediately when I saw news about the book, I was able to put it together and tie it to, the other author team and the work that Tony's doing. Because, and I think that's really valuable because I think not only is it going to be a natural progression for folks who are in the IT pro space who are now possibly becoming more comfortable with Office 365 and with the M365 workloads, and now starting to think a little bit more security focused. So this is a natural progression for them. But this is also a really good entry point for just pure InfoSec folks who have not played in the Microsoft space before, right? And there are a lot of people like that. There are a lot of people who come out of the Palo Alto, Cisco etc. world, CrowdStrike world, who have never really dipped their toe into the Microsoft ecosystem. I think this is going to be a really, really good entry point for them to kind of get involved and see what's actually going on.
Yeah, so and that's really important what you mentioned, because as you said, there's a whole audience that's familiar with Tony's book, the Office 365 book, and obviously after having read the book, you understand the product really well. The platform, I should say, really well, have certain insights. So the jump into the M365 security is more natural, but there is a whole army of people out there that are less familiar with Microsoft products as a whole, but they're now faced with new implementations, new features. Microsoft's everywhere these days. So what we try and do is, to keep it accessible, right? Not start up there, but start slowly and then build up and gradually into the book, which is also one of the reasons why the first chapter it's not really a technical chapter. It's more, okay, so how do you approach security? Because people that come from a security background, they have this process in mind. They have this, thinking hat, like their security mindset. But someone who's coming from the productivity side doesn't necessarily have that, and you kind of have to blend them together to kind of mix and match to both worlds, which in itself, we didn't want to create a 300-page book about process because that's dull. Everyone, understands why it's necessary, but it's still dull. So we kind of slimmed it down to about 15, 20 pages to kind of get everyone in that same mindset and then take them on the journey with identity, device management, and so forth and so on.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I think that's a pretty important way to kind of approach it, right? And you kind of have to have a mix of those various components. You can't just be all technical or all process, because you end up losing out on a bunch of, folks lose out on a bunch of things that they're looking to learn, but also you're not whole at that point. You're not, you can't be complete in your job if you don't understand, little bits of all of those pieces.
Mm-hmm. Agree. Yep.
Okay, well, look, Nick, I think Nick might have a question here.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Michael, who is the primary audience for this book? Is this an operations person who needs to add security to the landscape, or is this for a hardcore security person who needs to add Microsoft to their landscape?
That's a good question, Nick. I think there is value for both, right? This is for the tech savvy but non-security savvy IT professional that needs to do something with something in security of Microsoft 365. I mean, we all know how the sales cycle works, right? This Microsoft sales guy is there and tells them, hey, here's a great discount on the M365 E5 security bundle, and the company says, yeah, great, let's do this. And then, it rolls down the hill to the security teams or the operational teams, and they're like, well, this is the first time that we touch X, Y, or Z. What can we do with it? How do we do it? What's the best practice? What are the caveats, right? So some of them may have the actual Office 365 experience, and some of them may be coming from a purely security perspective. Like looking at our company and the projects that we do is we've got exactly that happening. Like I've got one project where a customer is migrating from McAfee to Defender ATP, and we're dealing with people that have dealt with McAfee for years. They know the product inside out, but they have no knowledge whatsoever of Defender ATP. But just looking at Defender by itself, you can't, because it's part of a whole bigger ecosystem. So it kind of ties in together with that whole M365 stuff. So for them, it's super valuable to have such a resource. But the same is true if you're coming from the other side, where we've come from Exchange, like all of us, all three of us, we're hardcore old school Exchange guys. We trickled into security, a couple of years back. If a book like that would have existed, I would have surely appreciated that rather than going out and having to figure out everything on my own.
Completely right. But just like so many other things in the IT landscape, is there a process that I can follow? And so here I'm kind of picking on, from an IT professional point of view, I could be ITIL aligned. From a security professional, I could be MITRE aligned. How do I align myself against the knowledge in the book?
Yeah, I agree. So I understand what you mean. So this is where the first chapter kind of comes in. I mean, there's so many frameworks out there that you could use to actually, build a strategy on what you're going to do. Personally, I'm a NIST cybersecurity framework fan, right, with the different phases. But there's organizations that adhere to whole other standards that have built their own standards. In my opinion, and maybe some people will be fringe at what I'm going to say, but I don't care which framework you use, as long as you use a framework, you have a plan, it works for you, I'm happy, right? So That's also what we try to explain in that first chapter. I do mention Mitra, I do mention ISO, I do mention PCI DSS, I do mention NIST cybersecurity framework. I explain to the people, these are the frameworks to look at. These are the highlights of these frameworks. Now go out and figure out what's important to you. Obviously, if you're a financial institute, PCI DSS will come up really quickly. And even there, we try and give some practical examples. Like there's this huge mapping sheet between all the different frameworks that tells you, the controls in this framework equal the controls in that framework. So we refer to that sheet to tell them, if you're already compliant with this, but you want to look at the other one, just use that sheet, do the mapping so that you don't do the work twice. But at the same time, we don't want this to become a book on how to use the frameworks. There's plenty of books out there that explain these frameworks into details. You could go on, the certification on one framework itself. So we wanted to explain why they're there and why it's important, but we didn't want to go into the detail of, this is how each of them work.
I think that sounds like a really, really good approach, honestly. And I, for one, can't actually wait to get my hands on this so that I can actually have a look at that, because I think that's definitely something that I've found particularly challenging, kind of entering into this world, is the fact that everyone has a framework that they look up to and that is super important to them, but the relationship between them and that, I think that's a super important kind of introductory step for sure.
I agree. Yep. Facing the same challenges, right? We're moving into ISO certification 27001 for our own company. Oh my gosh, it's like there's a whole avalanche of stuff coming to you and you're like, really? So it's again, trying to be practical. I think we could write 100 pages about one of the things, but we deliberately kept it, short and sweet, I'd say.
Yeah, I think that it sounds like it, right? And so a question I had for you was, I mean, there's so much as far as security functionality goes within the service, right? But I think there's a lot of organizations that still have this mentality that we give Microsoft our monthly subscription money and we've put our data in their service. Why do we have to worry about the security functionality of this, right? Shouldn't Microsoft be taking care of all of the security functionality for us? Why are we having to care about this? I mean, are you coming across that in Europe as well? Is that something that you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, less and less, to be honest, because people are getting more and more used to the cloud model where, there is a segregation of duties where, infrastructure, sure, that's Microsoft's worry. Like physical security, sure, let them take care of that. But, the layer that you build on top of that, solutions that you build on top of that, people are starting to understand that that's your responsibility. Now, there's a long way to go, right? There are still a lot of companies that try and figure out, but why do we need X, Y, Z? But, the reality is that whatever you see these days in the news, there is breaches, far and few in between, right? Every day there is a breach, there is a leak, there is something. I think, gradually people will understand, all right, we need to do this. Like you need to lock your door. A couple of 100 years back, no one locked their doors. There were no locks, right? The doors were open. Well, today, go out and find a house where there's no lock.
Yeah.
So I think it's pretty much the same.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think enable multi-factor, everyone. If you haven't done it, MFA. It's just my PSA for the day. We got to make sure to call that out in every episode, just because it's such an important thing. We see, although I think the last couple of weeks have been very much taken up by F5 and their vulnerability that everyone seems to be bypassing or whatever. But definitely a lot of the things that we are seeing could easily have been mitigated by just MFA. Right, but companies, I think, folks are not being educated, and they're not kind of taking that active decision to go, hey, let's see how we can continually improve this. This is not, the cloud is not set and forget, right? It doesn't matter what any vendor tells you. You can't just go and throw your data at a service, pay them, and forget about it. Like there has to be a continuous improvement model that you've got to be looking at where the threats can come from, because at the end of the day, the bad actors continue to evolve as well, right? And you can't just go, okay, well, this is the assumed knowledge that everyone has, and we're safe. Yeah, you might be safe today. That doesn't mean you're safe tomorrow, right? So I think this whole thing with F5 has really kind of shown a lot of folks that a lot of organizations that are slower to move to the cloud and are staying on-prem because security, right, are now the ones that are being targeted by this, this thing in their security, like their legacy infrastructure, if you will, right? So this is a very, very interesting thing to be kind of paying attention to.
I think we mentioned it in the book, a little spoiler there, but it's about 68% of all breaches in the cloud originate on premises, like 68%. That's a large number. And again, attackers or people with ill intent, they'll always take the path of least resistance. If it's easier to get into your cloud through your on-prem environment, they'll do that, right? And this is just true. I mean, when a pen test happens, you should know, right? Kodalski does these pen tests, right? Whenever a pen test happens, I've rarely seen them go after Azure AD first. They're like, okay, let's try and get into the device. And we're into Active Directory, then some lateral account movement, and bam, we've got your domain. And then from there, it's easy to get back up into the cloud. That's where the challenges lie. So the people that are full traditionally on premises, they have a lot of work to be done there, a lot more than, lowering your attack surface in the cloud. But at the same time, it's very different, right? The things that you have to deal with on-prem, they're not the same as in the cloud, which is also one of the messages that we're trying to get across is like, it is changing. Sure, a device is a device. That doesn't change. But, cloud platform, cloud applications, they operate in a very different way. They are security in a very different way, and therefore have different security measures or how to approach that, right?
Yeah, and even getting down to managing that infrastructure, right? The way that you typically would do that on premises versus the way that you're possibly doing it today, it's very different in the way that you approach it. So it's kind of like, I think the message really is that you have to be able to adapt to the way that the new modern way of doing things, and you can't be stuck in the old world for too long, right? Otherwise, you're gonna lag behind. So that's. So we've talked about a lot about the book, and honestly, I personally can't wait to get my hands on a copy here. Can you give us some information about where, when, how, all of that?
Sure. So I'm not sure when the podcast is going to be released, but our target is to release July 13th. I've got a full weekend of copy editing, building the book, and getting the PDF ready. We've got a website up, so the M365securitybook.com, where you can get to the book files, or actually to the Gumroad platform through which we're selling the book, which is the same platform as the Office 365 for IT Pros book. So Monday 13th, the book will be available. Obviously, we'll make a big splash on LinkedIn, Twitter. The website itself, we'll make it known, and then hopefully people will find their way to the book itself as well.
Okay, and are you going to be releasing on Amazon as well, or?
No, that's a deliberate choice we've made. And actually, I'm leaning on Tony's experience of building the book for Amazon. There's a couple of things, like the amount of effort going into building that book or the EPUB and making sure that's in Amazon, that's one thing. Secondly, Amazon doesn't support monthly updates. Gumroad is easy because it's just changing the PDF, like version 1 to version 2, and off you go, right? Nothing else changes. And because of that, I didn't want to take on more work. Plus, supporting the authors, supporting the marketing, the hosting, everything for the book costs money. Amazon, takes a 70% cut on the book.
Wow.
Which, it's great because you reach a bigger audience. But at the end of the day, I just think that the effort you put into it and the gains that you get from it and the gains that people get from it are too little to justify using Amazon as a platform.
I think that makes sense. I mean, personally, I've always used the Gumroad platform because I prefer just having the PDF copy of the book, right? It's more portable for me. I know others disagree with that because they want to use Kindle and whatnot. It's not my preferred method of reading, so it is what it is. But I think that makes sense, and I think it's good to get the message out there to folks. Like, there's one platform that's where you can go and get it, and that's also where you get your updates, right? Because remind me how the subscription model works again. So you buy an edition of the book and you get all updates that are part of that edition, correct?
Yes, correct. So there is a yearly cycle. We're starting July this year, which is coincidentally called the 2026 or 2020-06 edition. But anyway, so the 2020 edition runs up until June next year. You buy the book, you get all the updates that year, and we are committing not just to updates of the chapters, but this year we're also committing to a practical guidance chapter on NDATP, on an Azure Sentinel chapter, and an Office ATP chapter. So with the book, you'll be getting that. And then up until June, you'll get updates. Sometime next year, March-ish timeframe, we'll start thinking or building the new book, which means new edition, 2021 edition. We may, do a complete overhaul. We may add more chapters into that. Really depends on how everything, moves along. I mean, we all know that Microsoft's doing shifting in that space as well with the acquisition of CyberX in the OT space. So we're closely monitoring that, and then based on that, we'll build a new book, new edition, and from there on, people who've bought the first book can get the new one at a discount. Kind of appreciate their loyalty to the book, and then they get updates for a year as well. So there's no monthly fee; it's just a one-off, and then you'll get the updates for a year.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think what's great about that, and certainly, the way that I've approached this with the other book is that the book is so large now. It's gotten so big that it's a fantastic reference, and realistically, I don't read through the whole thing every time I get it now. I just I read the new chapters when I get the new chapters, but I know I have this kind of referenceable thing in my tool bag, if you will, right, where I can rip it out. And remember back in the day when we had the Exchange Administrator's pocket tool guide? Yeah, it's something like that.
Yeah, well, at the same time, though, I'm really keen on making sure we don't bloat the book, because it's so easy to go over, a certain amount of pages. Right now, we're not at, I think we're at 500-600 pages, which is sizable by itself. But once you go over that, it becomes that huge chunk, and people start not reading certain chapters, right? Or they start being selective, which is fine, right? But I really want to keep it concise so that it is digestible. Obviously some things just take room, like the 100 and so many pages we have on Defender ATP. It's just because we need that much, right? We honestly, we couldn't have done it with less. Maybe we could have done 90 pages and cut some redundancy here and there. But at the end of the day, you need what you need. And my goal is to keep it sizable. But we'll see. Talk to me in a year, and maybe I'll be at 600-700 pages. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, fair enough. And I think the thing is, given your experience in the industry and given your experience learning things, I think you have a fairly good idea of what it takes to be able to get that message out there in a way that is going to be useful to someone without it being too bloated or too kind of, too wordy. But also, where sometimes where it's just not enough, right? Unfortunately, the internet is full of blog posts that tackle a particular topic, but really just not even scratch the surface. Basically, they just kind of give you a little bit of interest, and you need to, to everyone who has a blog's credit, that's great. But sometimes you need to dig one level deeper, right? And I think what's great about your history with the other book, also your history as a blog author and speaker and stuff, is I think that you have that balance. You know how to find that balance. And so, yeah, really looking forward to what you and the team have kind of come up with here. I can't wait to get my hands on a copy.
You'll get a copy from me, but only if you give feedback, because this is, one of the messages that we're going to push really hard. To me, that book is a collaborative effort, right? Yes, the author team has written something, but we can only improve, make it better, and make it, more suitable if people use the feedback, right? If they email us and tell us we like it, or hey, we're missing this bit and piece, so that we, maybe we haven't thought about it, or maybe we didn't prioritize it in the same way that people are asking for. Call it a user voice. If 100 people mail us and tell us we really need this piece of information, and we as authors, we didn't prioritize it as high, we might just shift it up in priority and just add it into the book because there was demand for it, right? So I'm really keen to see how that's going to work. I know that Tony's getting tons of feedback through his feedback channels on the book, even to correct things that's wrong, because everyone can make mistakes.
Of course.
Like our tech reviewer, he's done an amazing job, but he's going haywire there through all the chapters, all the evidence that we're firing at him, all the things that he needs to test. I mean, we're doing our utter best to make sure that it's without any spelling errors, grammar errors. But even me as a copy editor, I'm not even native English speaker, so things will slip, but we're counting on that feedback.
And I was actually just going to touch on that point, right? Is I'm always amazed by the fact that, and I've read some of your works before, where we've done work for the same writing vendor or whatever, and we've kind of reviewed each other's stuff. And I'm always amazed that, as someone who's not even an English first language speaker, the level at which you managed to crank out this awesome work, right? So, kudos to that. And I think this is something that everyone needs to also understand, is that the team, and correct me if I'm wrong, and I'd actually like you to introduce the team that that you're working with, because I actually don't know everyone personally, like I know you, but you guys are all based in Europe, right?
No, not really. So we've got Amar and Ahmed, who are both also MVPs, do a lot of work in the security space. They're based out of the United Arab Emirates. Or actually, I think Amar moved to Dubai right now. So they're based out of there. I've got a couple of folks in the Netherlands. I've got Tess, who coincidentally works for me as well. And it just so happened that when I started reaching out to folks, that they were the first to respond and said, "Yeah, sure, we want to do that." But yeah, it's been helpful because less time zone issues. It's only a couple of hours apart. But we'll see. I mean, reaching out to the folks for the Office ATP chapter, I think we might actually cross and jump over to the US to onboard someone else. But as far as the team goes, so we've got Amar and Ahmed, who are doing the MD ATP chapter. We've got Peter, who's doing Intune and identity. We've got Thomas, who's focusing on information protection, which coincidentally, you could say it is more a compliance feature rather than a security feature, but as you said, it kind of belongs to it. Next to building the book and the copy editing, I'm doing MCAS, doing the introduction, and also doing some work here and there in the other chapters. And then Tess is doing the all-up review.
Oh, okay. And I think what's great about having like an international team like that is everyone has their potentially slightly different market. So there's going to be slightly different point of view and slightly different experience coming into it, and blending that all together. I think that's really powerful too.
It's incredibly useful. Like in the talks that we've had, the discussions that we've had, I've learned so much, like insights from Amar and certain things and how to approach it, even marketing the book, but also structurizing the book. We've had another meeting last week where we're just talking, like brainstorming, and all of a sudden everyone was like, "Yeah, wow, that's a great idea," just by having that interaction. And that's it's a learning process for each and every one of us, and it's fun. So yeah.
Wow, that's super exciting. Honestly, I think I can't wait. Like I said, and it's really, the timing on this is absolutely perfect. Like you couldn't have picked a better a better time for it. So I think with that, I mean, look, just kind of keeping an eye on the clock here. I know we've all got other things to get to. Nick, I just wanted to check in that you're still breathing, buddy. I'm sorry I've taken over. But
if the questions weren't so good, I'd throw in some more, but you're doing great.
Michael, before we let you go, as we always kind of do when we kind of tie off the end of the show, how do you want to be found? Can obviously it'd be great if you wanted to give out the URL for the book again. How do people find you on social media if you want to be found? But I know you have a fairly active social profile, so go ahead.
Well, not as active as I used to be, just because I'm writing the book. But on Twitter, I'm at Van Hybrid. I think that's the easiest way to get a hold of me, because my last name, don't even try to pronounce it in English. So at Van Hybrid, from there, you've got the URL, you'll have the book title, you'll see my blog post. Obviously, I'm on LinkedIn as well, but has my full back name, and Van Horenbeeck. But through Twitter, you'll easily find me. I've got my own blog at vanhybrid.com, so you can get to it there, or the book website, m365securitybook.com as well. But I'll share it with you so that you can post it with the recording as well.
Yeah, thank you. I think we'll definitely make sure to put all of these in the show notes for the episode as well, so that we can kind of get that out there. But look, thanks again for taking the time to speak to us. This is a super exciting sort of announcement, I guess, and we're really pleased that you came on to talk to us about that. And I know it's afternoon time for you in Europe, but I'm sure you've still got a few things to get on with for the day. So
Unfortunately, yes. Like, you've got a whole day ahead. So I'm I'm actually done with my day. 2 more hours and I can sign off. But yeah, anyway, guys, I really appreciate, you having me on the call, inviting me to talk about the book. Really appreciate that as well.
Hey, no problem. Thank you. We're always happy to have you. So thanks for coming back.
My pleasure. Cheers.
Cool. Take care, guys.
Bye.